Hi, for this video, I'll be showing you how to shade a skirt, and I'm really sorry that I suck at explaining things, but I think it'll be fine. Also, please ignore my voice, I'm kind of sick right now. So, first thing you want to do is get your base color, and then you can start on the top of your base, which is the band of your skirt. You only need to do one side because you can just mirror it after. I have to speed most of this video up because I'm really slow. I'm making the skirt pretty short so it'll be easier to show because they're a lot quicker to shade. And right here, I'm just mirroring it. I actually did not like how the shape was when I did that, so I just went over it a little bit. But other than that, I think it's fine. And once everything has been like filled in at the top, I just kind of clean up the edges and get ready to do the bottom of it. I feel like I barely followed the reference properly, but it looks fine at the end, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be exact to your inspo picture. I'm just adjusting it a little bit, and once I was happy with the shape, then it was pretty much ready to start shading. I was starting with the band, so I just got like my darkest color from my palette and a really small brush to just go over the bottom like this. I kind of messed up, so I decided I'm just gonna mirror it and only draw half of this. I actually took a long time shading this, but it's fine because here it is spit up. I had to adjust it a little bit because I didn't like how it was looking. There was like a little part in the middle, it was just really annoying me. Once I had done that, I made a new layer for my next part of the shading, and I'm basically copying my reference where all of these lines are. So I'm just kind of placing them while looking at my inspo picture. This takes me a really long time, but it's fine because once you've done enough of it, you kind of get the idea of like the shape of it, and you can continue the shading without using the reference. If you didn't notice, I'm using size 1 pen fade in, fade out. It's pretty good for basically most of the shading I do. Once you have all of the darker lines down, you're going to be doing the slightly lighter areas, so you'd pick your middle color and kind of continue on from the lines you've already done. I keep the pen on the same size, but sometimes you can actually do a bigger size for this part because the area is usually just so much bigger. The main goal of this is to keep the top of it quite sharp and then the bottoms would be more blended out and softer. It might take a little bit of time to do this, but in the end it's going to be worth it, so don't worry. Once I have placed all of my lines, I am ready to start blending it with the mix tool. I used a pretty small size on number 2, and I just kind of went on the ends to blend it out, but I did not touch the top. I want to keep some of it sharp still. Sometimes if I don't like how something is sticking out, I'll just erase it a little and fix it up while I'm blending, but usually it's fine. Just keep on your lines without blending way too much. You don't want it to be blurry. After I have blended, I start playing with the opacity until I like how dark it is. And then I get started with my next part of the shading. So basically, I'm going over everything with the same first darkness of my brush, and I'm kind of doing way bigger lines. You have to trust the process of this part because this isn't going to be very visible afterwards. It just kind of adds more depth to your shading. After I have finished placing all the lines, I get my mix tool and I start going over everything with a bigger brush so everything gets completely blended out. You can just mix this one as much as you want to. It does not matter if it's like quite blurry. Just make sure to keep little spaces at the top for when you want to do highlights, because you don't want the whole entire thing to be just one big block of shading. I was adjusting it as I go, but it was basically done, so right after I did that, I changed the opacity to around 20. I usually keep this quite low. It makes a little bit of a difference and usually makes my designs look better when I do that. Now I'm onto shading the band. So I'm basically just basing this off my reference. I had one side with like a little shadow and then the rest was just shaded above it. I stopped mixing it and I used a brush that was way too big. I kind of messed up a little bit. But it's completely fine because if you do any mess ups, you can get a soft eraser on a bigger size and basically just fix everything up. I made sure to especially erase the places that are gonna have highlights because you don't want the shadows to affect them. I changed the opacity of that layer to match the rest of my shading. Then I got ready for the next part. I noticed the band had like one little crease, so I wanted to just quickly add that, just like my reference. I drew the line and then I blended it out. I adjusted it a little bit, but it's pretty much like this. Afterwards, I changed the opacity to be quite a lot less visible, and once I was happy with that, I made a new layer. I got a smaller brush and I just went over the end. I wanted to darken one area of it. Creases don't usually need to be one shade, so I usually do darken the ends. And then once I have that, I went over a little bit with some more shadows. I went above, saving space for highlight, and I also went below it with a little bit of a gap as well. I blended that out quite a bit and changed the opacity once again, so it kind of blended in. Once all of my shading has been placed, I start with the highlights. I started on this area because I was already working on it. I basically just went over some dark lines with some white, and then I got next to blend out the edges. I kept a little bit of it sharp because I don't want all of it to be sharp, but I also don't want it to all be blurry. I started adding highlights to the sides as well because the reference picture was kind of like that, and I blend them out so they aren't too blocky. Once I've done that, I adjust it, and then I can start adding highlights to the ruffle part of my skirt. For this, I would use the same brush I shaded with on the same size, and I would use the color white again. I just go over each edge of the crease in areas that don't have shadows facing outwards. This took me forever. I had to speed it up quite a lot. But once I had done that, I was able to get mix again and start blending out the edges, just like I did with the creases, but this time it's on the white areas only. I try my best not to accidentally go on the shadows. Make sure when you're smudging that you avoid putting the highlights on top of the shadows unless you're cleaning it up. After this has been mixed, I change the opacity once again. This is what I do to all of my shading layers until it all looks good together because we just want it to look good. It doesn't really matter if it's not that visible. This is not something you have to add to your skirts, but I noticed my reference had some stripes, so I wanted to add them as well. I didn't really worry too much about them being even because they looked fine either way, or at least I think they look fine. I felt like they were quite harsh compared to my reference, so I just made them a little bit less visible, and I think my skirt was looking pretty good actually. Another extra thing I wanted to add was some shadows right at the bottom, so I got my darkest color once again, and I just kind of went under the little bumps of my skirt shape. I also blended them a little bit before I changed the opacity of them. I want it to be visible, but not way too visible. I kind of wish I made it higher, but it's a bit too late now. After I finish shading, I adjust all of my layers, And then the skirt's pretty much done. If you would like to use Firealpaca like I did, I just made a video on how to use this app, and if you'd like to see more design tutorials, please subscribe. Also, be sure to check out my Roblox clothing groups.